All rise. Oh yay, oh yay, oh yay. The Court of Appeals for the 4th Judicial Appellate District is now open pursuant to call.
Good afternoon. Please be seated. Good afternoon and welcome to the 4th Court of Appeals here in San Antonio. In February of 2001, we recognized the legal accomplishments of then Chief Justice Carlos Cadena, who served as the first Mexican-American on this court and who retired in 1990 after 25 years on the bench. He and Justice Reeves, also a member of this court, are the namesake of this building, the Cadena Reeves Justice Center, where the 4th Court of Appeals currently sits and holds court, and where we presently are now able to invite a greater audience via live stream on the 4th Court's YouTube channel. Greetings to our virtual audience, which includes many members of the bench and bar, family, and others who would wish to join us today to celebrate the life and contributions of Mr. David Arnold Benavides. But for the present environment, this courtroom and these proceedings would very likely have this courtroom bursting at the seams with those who would wish to attend in person and celebrate the life and accomplishments of Mr. Benavides, a proud veteran of the U.S. Army. We host these memorials in partnership with the San Antonio Bar Association. The purpose of these memorials is twofold. First, it's intended to honor the memory of judges and attorneys like Mr. Benavides, whose lives served as an example to other members of the profession. In so doing, we inspire others and ourselves to promote the professionalism and appreciation for how our skills and talents serve to help others in our community. The second purpose of these services is to promote our legal fraternity and sorority, as honoring the lives of our esteemed colleagues gives us all deeper roots within our legal community here in Bexar County and abroad. I'd like to introduce the members of the 4th Court of Appeals, beginning to my far left, Justice Lisa Rodriguez. To my immediate right, Justice Irene Rios. To my left, Justice Beth Watkins. And to my far right, Justice Lori Valenzuela. 2 members of our court, Justices Patricia Alvarez and Lucelana Chapa, send their regrets and were unable to be here presently today. I'd like to recognize the members of the Benavides family who are present here attending these memorial services. Daughters Tammy Benavides, Carol and Mike Jarrell, Catherine and Justin Tome, David Benavides Jr., and grandson Jared Tome. At this time, I'd like to introduce and invite the speaker, Mr. Alan Kazir, to make remarks.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I invite you to the podium.
Chief Justice, I can't tell you how awkward it is for a veteran lawyer to face away from the bench.
And your back is excused to the court.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon. David and I were very, very close friends for many, many years. David was the godfather of my youngest son. We came to address each other as compadre, which was a relationship that I know was important to both of us. I've said before that when David Benavides was your friend, he would give you an abrazo, to greet you. When you received an abrazo from David, you knew you were his friend. Tammy, Tara, David, Kathy, thank you so much for the privilege of speaking about your father, my very good friend, David. I also would like to acknowledge Alma Benavides, David's sister, who is also a member of the bar, and his mother, Eloise Benavides, I'm proud to say my client, who is unable to be here today. One of the things that you learn when you spend 5 or 6 days in a remote wilderness hunting camp in the snow, the ice, the rain, the mud, you first learn something about the character and the good humor of the man you're sharing the tent with. The second thing that you learn, neither David nor I learned this lesson very well, and that is you really need to check the weather report before you leave the trailhead for an 18-hour horseback ride into the Absaroka wilderness. What I've said about David is that he was very much a man for all seasons. He had so many and varied interests. First of all, he was, of course, a lawyer and was interested in the law, in helping people. And David had a very unique manner of practicing law. He wasn't very good with long distance relationships, emails, Zoom hearings. He wanted to practice law person to person, face to face, and he would travel long distances to do exactly that. He and I both had the privilege. David asked me to become involved with a case for a family in Cotulla. It was a large family. It was a tough case, a fight over mineral rights on a ranch. Whenever David wanted to speak with that family, he and I would drive to Cotulla. And we were invariably offered the best menudo in South Texas, which we enjoyed at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Ramirez. David was a member of the Masonic Lodge, and he was very much involved with the Shriners. He was a clown, and I'll never forget the first time my wife and daughter and I saw David as a clown at the Fiesta Parade. And my wife, being from another country, asked me if it was really okay that a lawyer appear in a clown costume. Wasn't that perhaps beneath the dignity of a lawyer? I said, no. It's exactly the opposite. David's personality is such that he takes a great deal of pleasure and in entertaining the children, which was one of his favorite things. As Chief Justice Martinez said, he was a veteran. When David graduated from St. Mary's undergraduate school in about 1970, he had been a member of ROTC. He was commissioned a second lieutenant in the Army Special Forces. Now, in that time, if you were a young second lieutenant assigned to Special Forces, you had about a 99% chance of going to Vietnam, where many of those second lieutenants never returned from. Fortunately, David was fluent in Spanish. Being fluent in Spanish, he went to Panama where he was a firearms instructor. One of the things David would sometimes mention was that he actually instructed Manuel Noriega, the former Panamanian strongman who later went to federal prison in the United States. David was his firearms instructor. He recalled that the other Panamanian military students made fun of Noriega because he had a pockmarked face. I think that led to David's interests in firearms and marksmanship that I'll speak about in just a moment. David loved riding motorcycles. He actually took this picture here in front of Devil's Tower in southeastern Wyoming. That's his Harley, obviously, in front of it. I thought that kind of strikes me in the heart, at least, to see that motorcycle in that particular place and remember David. He was very interested in genealogy. I mean, going back centuries. He would tell my wife at times that they were perhaps cousins because he had traced through DNA his roots back to central Russia. But they had immigrated down the rivers to Ukraine, where my wife is from. He was a member of a number of genealogical societies. You know, on a long road trip, 10 or 12 miles to Wyoming or Montana, David can give you quite a lesson in genealogy, and it was interesting. It was educational. David was very proud of his Hispanic roots and tracing his immediate family. I know that he had family from the Monterrey, Mexico area. Dr. Oscar Martinez was his cousin. Tony Maldonado, another cousin. They were from that area. Considering that David rarely talked about anything other than his children, I have to think that he loved them dearly. In fact, I know he did. He sometimes complained about actions of one son or daughter or the other, but at the end of the day, he loved them dearly. Probably most of you know that most of the relationship between David and I surrounded our hunting expeditions, which were an annual thing, sometimes more than once a year. I can tell you that David was a highly ethical hunter. He was probably the best marksman I have ever met. And I've met a lot of hunters. I've never known David to attempt to harvest an animal and not have a clean, ethical kill. Never once in all those years did I have to track an animal that David had shot at. He didn't miss. One of the stories I tell about David, you can see that picture of a huge bull elk. We were hunting in Wyoming between Cody and Yellowstone, and it was late November. It was cold, windy, higher up. There was quite a bit of snow. David had an elk license. I had a deer permit. We were both successful. David highly successful. But when David and the guide saw this elk, it was about 700 yards. That's a pretty long shot. There was really not going to be any way, however, to approach that bull, and the guide asked David, "Can you make that shot?" So he obtained a rest and fired the shot. The animal was laying down, and there was no indication of a hit or a miss. The guide said, "Take another shot." David did, and at this point, the bull's head dropped to the ground. When that animal was recovered and skinned, I swear the bullet holes were that far apart. At 700 yards, that was an amazing shot. David and I think we must have picked the toughest places in America to go to. We started out hunting in a place called Black's Canyon, Utah. We sure enough got snowed in on that trip. After that, we began hunting in a place in Wyoming called Devil's Basin. In order to get into Devil's, you start on the east side of the Continental Divide, you ride over the divide and down into Devil's Basin. Riding down, the trail goes through a place that is called the Ice Box. And that's exactly what it was. It was a tough ride in and out. There was invariably ice on the trail, which is a bad thing to be riding on, especially with horses with iron horseshoes. We would walk both up and down the ice box. Later, we hunted in a place called Panther Creek, Idaho. Just a quick story about Panther Creek. Ron Johnson brought his Jeep. And of course, we'd filled the Jeep up with gas before we went into camp. And we also filled up the 5-gallon extra gas can on the back of the Jeep. Nobody noticed that that gas can had rusted out. And so the gasoline slowly dripped out of that gas can. And at some point, we are low on gas in the main tank, but we're thinking, oh, we're fine. We have an extra 5 gallons. We then discover we don't. So David and I set out to a place called the Panther Creek Lounge, which is in the middle of the Salmon Wilderness. And it was occupied by miners, tough guys. They still had their earmuffs on from the dynamite. In order to walk in the door of that lounge, and it had on the side of the building, it actually said gasoline, which was the main reason for stopping there, but after all, it was a lounge. So as we're walking in, there is a half wolf, half dog who's on a chain. The chain is just exactly the right length without more than a couple inches clearance for you to reach the door to get into the Panther Creek Lounge. We walked in quickly. We were quickly informed. No, they don't sell gasoline here anymore. But David struck up a conversation with the miners that had to do with Mexican food in San Antonio versus Austin. And at the end of that conversation, the miners said, you know what, let us take you back over to the mine. We have some gas tanks there. We'll fill you up. And that's exactly what happened. We'd probably still be there if we hadn't met those guys. That bull was taken at a place called Dead Indian Creek. Probably the toughest hunt David and I were on was in the head of the Thoroughfare River, which is just off the southeast corner of Yellowstone Park. It snowed the It was 18 miles in. It snowed every inch of the way. David had hurt his back before the trip ever started, and it only got worse after that ride into camp, which was partly riding and partly walking. You generally walk the horses downhill in the snow. It got so bad that there was one of the other hunters had been injured in a horse wreck, and they had called a helicopter to come pick him up. My brother and I tried everything way in the world to get David to get on that helicopter, but he wouldn't do it. He stuck it out and he rode out. It was a really tough hunt. That was the hunt in which we saw more wolves and grizzly bears than elk. David had earlier asked why there are snow shovels kept on the top of Deer Creek Pass. We learned on the way out why those snow shovels were there when we had to snow shovel for a couple of hours through snow drifts to even get over the pass. I want to tell one other little story. That picture there with the white frame is a picture of a wolf. In the jaws of the wolf, there's the foreleg of a black Angus calf. That wolf sits at the end of a bar in a place called Meeteetse, Wyoming. There's 2 bars in Meeteetse. David and I never discriminated much. And it was good that for a guy that liked to bar hop a little bit, because the only 2 bars in Meeteetse are next to each other. So after you've had a drink here, you just step next door and have another drink. One of the bars is the Cowboy Bar. This is actually called the Elkhorn Bar. David and I have made a habit of it for many years to stop by the Elkhorn and Meeteetse and toast that wolf with a shot of tequila. And I have promised myself that I will continue to do that at least once a year going forward. I've already made it there this year. It's not about the philosophy or the argument over the reintroduction of the wolves in the Yellowstone area. I think everyone's aware of the fact that there's a bit of a disagreement between the environmentalists and the ranchers and the big game hunters. You can probably figure out which side David and I were on. But I've always enjoyed my companionship with David, especially when we were able to tip up a shot of tequila and honor the wolf of Meeteetse. Thank you again for permitting me to come and speak with you.
Thank you, Mr. Kazir. At this time, I'd like to invite Tammy Benavides. You may. It's a pleasure to have you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thank you for doing this for my father. And we're missing your father here today. As you all know, family and friends were very important to Dad. Family, of course, was always primary, but friends became family very quickly sometimes too. And that meant we had extended friends and family. I did not have the opportunity to speak at my father's funeral because I was sick with the big C. And I appreciate being able to come up here and speak and share some things. And you're a hard act to follow, Alan. You had so many things to say, and thank you for saying all of that you did. We learned so much from him from you because of the experiences you shared with him. He didn't share a lot. Sometimes he was secretive because those were things that he shared with you. So we appreciate you sharing that because we learn more from him about his adventures. And that's one thing that he was very big on, was adventures. Adventures with different kinds of beer, music, trips, motorcycle rides. And he even shared all of that with us when we were growing up, when we would take vacations from one California to Florida. It was not often, but it was wonderful when we were able to do that. And we were able to have adventures later in life. And that's one thing that Dad was very big on, was exploring and experiencing life. That was huge. He wanted us to be independent. He wanted us to be adventurous. He wanted us to explore life and be independent of other people. And that was big. I want to be able to share things on behalf of my siblings, but there's only so much that I can share because I didn't experience Dad through their eyes. But I will say that the 13th of this month was 14 months that he's been passed, and every day we miss him, every day. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about him or talk about him. I work at USA and I've been there almost 20 years. And because of him, I say that USA was in my blood, because he was part of USA before we were even born. And I think because of him, I actually worked there. I think he somehow played parts in heaven for me to, especially now in the last year, to get promotions there and be blessed. And I think because of him, our family is truly blessed in so many ways. So many ways. My grandmother, his mother, is going to be 99 this year. And I always thought that he would live as long as she did. So him passing was a surprise, unexpected. And I wish that he had had more time, but I know that he's always with us. And I know that he had a very, very full life, a very, very full life. So thank you, everyone who knew him, who loved him, who enjoyed a beer with him or a drink with him, who laughed with him, who cried with him, and who shared with him. It means a lot because it made him the man he was. And he brought that to his family, and that was important. So thank you all. Thank you all for doing this. Again, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Benavides. At this time, we'll welcome the comments of the president of the San Antonio Bar Association, Ms. Donna McElroy.
Madam Justice, may it please the court.
It does.
Memorial resolution on the death of David Arnold Benavides on behalf of the San Antonio Bar Association. Whereas David Arnold Benavides was born December 27th, 1946 in San Antonio and passed away on July 13th, 2021. And whereas Mr. Benavides graduated from Brackenridge High School and received his JD from St. Mary's University School of Law in 1974. And whereas Mr. Benavides was a longtime member of the San Antonio Bar Association, the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association, and the Federal Bar Association. And whereas Mr. Benavides was recognized with a National Defense Service Medal, a parachutist badge, and sharpshooter badge for his service in the United States Army, and was a life member of the Disabled American Veterans, Veterans of Foreign Wars, and Special Forces Association. And whereas Mr. Benavides was a member of the Masonic Lodge in Helotes, Texas, and the Alzavar Shrine. Since 1986, he served as a shrine clown at fundraisers and delivered cheer to the children at the Shrine Burn Centers and Shrine Orthopedic Hospitals. And whereas Mr. Benavides shared his love of history through his membership in Los Barnos Genealogical Historical Society, son of the Republic of Texas, and as a reenactor of Tejano history. And whereas Mr. Benavides is survived by his mother, Eloise Garza Benavides, daughters Tammy Marie Benavides, Tara Michelle Gerald, Catherine Ruth Tome, son David Arnold Benavides Jr., mother of his children Gwendolyn Diane Lewis, brother Jerome Benavides, sister Catherine Nasia, Alma E. Garcia, grandchildren Sean Gerald, Shelby Gerald, Jerome Tome, Dylan Tome, Logan Benavides, Elizar Santos, Ezekiel Santos. Be it resolved that the San Antonio Bar Association and the Fourth Court of Appeals of Texas express their genuine regret on the death of David Arnold Benavides and express their sincerest sympathy to his family and to his friends. Be it further resolved that this resolution be appended to the minutes of the San Antonio Bar Association and copies sent to his family. Be it further resolved that this resolution be placed in the permanent records and minutes of the Fourth Court of Appeals of Texas, dated this 15th day of September, 2022. Please accept our sincerest condolences.
Thank you, Mr. President. McElroy. At this time, I'd like to invite a colleague and friend of the family, Justice Lori Valenzuela, who's asked to make some remarks.
Just briefly, I wanted to, as Tammy pointed out, our dads did know each other. And I was trying to listen and remind myself where their paths would have crossed. And I realized it could have been several different places, several different times. They were certainly at St. Mary's together at the same time. They were in ROTC together at the same time. They were fraternity brothers. And then, of course, they would have had their military experience, common military experience as well. So wherever that started, it certainly grew. And I can tell you that my dad was very fond of David and was his death was very unexpected. And so I want you to know on behalf of our family, but certainly as an extension from my dad, that he extends those condolences. And he really was a very good friend of his. So I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you, Justice. Each memorial service is recorded by a court reporter and later transcribed, and a copy of which is presented to the surviving members of the family and will be entered into the formal minutes of the Fourth Court of Appeals. The proclamation by the San Antonio Bar is further entered into the minutes of the Fourth Court. Hoffman Reporting and Video Services have donated their services for this purpose. They volunteer and have volunteered their time for many years and donate their services. So please join me in applause and an expression of our gratitude.
Thank you.
That concludes our court memorial for this afternoon. In honor of Mr. Benavides, the Fourth Court will remain in recess for the rest of the day. And if you, with your permission, the court would wish to come down and visit with the family and friends of Mr. Benavides. And with that, the memorial is adjourned. Thank you.